Well, we're on the top of the hour at 2 o'clock, so let's just kick it off
Yeah.
and we do this on time. So why don't we just do a quick introduction? Gail, do you want to introduce yourself tell me a little bit about who you are and what makes you so amazing and wonderful?
Oh, thank you, Doug. I am Gail Rubin, the doyen of death. Death, not death. I am a pioneering death educator who uses humor and film clips and movies now to help get people to address a topic most people avoid. One of the great things about having this conversation is that even though 100% of us will die, less than 30% of adults do any end of life planning. Very important in the financial areas.
Hmm.
I am a TEDx speaker like yourself. I've done two TEDx talks, one about planning ahead for end of life issues called The Good Goodbye, and last year in 2025, I did a second one about medical aid in dying and having some experiences with people using that. I'm very excited to announce my newest book, 98.6 Mortality Movies to See Before You Die, is coming out April 16th. And it is already available for pre order on Amazon. So I hope people will go to Amazon and pre-order it, either in ebook or in paperback. And that's me. I've been doing this for 16 years. So my motto is talking about sex won't make you pregnant, talking about funerals won't make you dead. And so far, so good.
That's fantastic. Oh, well, thanks, Gail. That's great. I know you've been a great friend and a great resource to so many people who've helping them through their end of life process. And you've been there for so many people, including your own family members. So it's been a real journey for you. And I'm Doug Lynam. I'm an investment advisor, a TEDx speaker, two-book author. My first book is called From Monk to Money Manager, a former monk's financial guide to becoming a little bit wealthy and why that's okay. And then my newest book, which I'm really thrilled about, just came out, is called Taming Your Money Monster, 9 Paths to Money Mastery with the Enneagram. Yay, which we hopefully will have some time to jump into a little bit of Enneagram work if anyone's interested. But first, we want to maybe talk a little bit about like what do you need to do to like we can talk about we're going to talk about the emotional side of death planning here in a minute, but maybe let's start with the practical side of like, all right, what are the things that we really need to be thinking about on our bucket list here before and then we'll talk about kind of the emotional reasons about maybe why we don't do it or where we struggle in trying to maybe get this stuff done.
Yes. So you did a really good note about this, that we all need a will.
Hmm.
And some people need to go further than a will and have a trust. If you die without a will, whatever state you die in has got a line of succession for people to get your stuff,
Yeah.
whether you dictate it or not. If you have a will, that has to be probated. So you go to court, or whoever you put in charge of your stuff has to go to court and say, this is how the deceased wanted their assets distributed. The thing about going to court and probate is it's open to the public. Everybody gets to find out what kind of properties you own and how much money you've got in the bank. And this is why setting up a trust can be very helpful if you want to keep your personal assets private. Now, a lot of people think, oh, you have to be very rich to have a trust. Not necessarily, but I was the executor for my parents' trust. I still am. It's kind of an ongoing process. And what you do is you title your your cars, your houses, your bank accounts, your investment accounts into that trust.
Mhm.
And what happened was one account with over $23,000 didn't get put in the trust. So we had to open a probate for that. And as a result of that, I started getting all these letters saying, "Wouldn't you like to sell this house in Florida?" And it was like, dang, if we didn't have to do the probate, I wouldn't be still getting all of these letters, you know, over a year later.
Yeah. But we should also say, but even just having a will is so essential for the probate process. If you don't have a will, then it's up to the courts to decide how everything gets distributed. And that gets really messy. It's really ugly. It's a terrible thing to put your relatives through because then all the knives come out, the emotional issues come out. It gets to be very it can fracture families, it can create political divides. And basically you're putting your loved ones, especially your spouse or partner, in a very difficult position. And right at a time when they're most emotionally vulnerable, when they have the least mental capacity to be dealing with this stuff, you're putting them into a very tight, difficult legal quagmire, essentially. So even probate with a will is so much better than probate without a will.
Yeah.
And a lot of people think, okay, this is going to be, I mean, and it's, you should always, it's good to have an attorney for this process, especially if you have a significant estate, if you have a lot of assets, it's going to be better to use a lawyer. And especially if you have children or young children, you know, and both of you, if you and your spouse should die or you're a single parent, you need to really put some caveats on how custody of your children is going to be handled. So a lawyer can be really useful for that. But even a quick will, even if you just use some of the online programs, there's Rocket Lawyer, there's Willmaker Pro. This does not have to be an expensive process. Even if you get started with using some simple online tools to create your will, better than nothing. It gets you going. The only real thing you need to be mindful of if you do the will yourself is that you make sure that it gets notarized. And so that's a really important process to make sure that it's been a notary makes it doesn't make it official. It just makes it less likely that someone could contest the will. But even an unnotarized will that's been signed by you is still legal in court.
And of course, there are the other documents for before you're a dead person, which
Hmm.
is durable power of attorney,
Yep.
who can help handle your finances if you're still alive, but you're not mentally competent to
Right.
take care of your affairs. Your healthcare proxy, sometimes called a living will. It's like if you're sick in the hospital and you're not able to say what kind of treatment you want. Do you want to be kept alive as long as possible? Do you want DNR, do not resuscitate, or um, so those are other documents that also need to be notarized
Mhm.
when you're doing your will.
And that's really important because people think about think about their death, but they don't think about, well, if I'm incapacitated, now what happens? And those things, that durable power of attorney might just because you got no car accident, right? And you've got, you're in the hospital for a couple of weeks. What happens in that process, and also the DNR, the do not resuscitate, is so important. I saw that with my stepfather when he was dying, and it could have gone a lot smoother if he'd had some of those documents more solidly in place.
Yeah, and I think I think the idea about being incapacitated, we don't want to think about that.
Yeah,
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 uh,
stuff.
yeah,
But it'll happen to all of us many of us at some point, and someone needs to be able to pay your bills and pay the hospital, make sure all your finances are still squared away, and can make those healthcare decisions for you when you can't.
and that power of attorney goes away when you die, and then the the needing to carry out all of the financial issues goes to the executor for the
Mm,
estate.
right.
Yeah.
And of course, there's two powers of attorney. There's one for healthcare and there's one for finances, and they're completely separate. They're not the same thing.
Yeah.
So you really need both.
And you might want to have different people handling those two different areas.
Yeah, exactly. So we got that. And then what other documents do we need on your list there, Gail?
Uh, the advance directive, actually, you could have a document sort of like the five wishes form, where you talk about, do you want artificial hydration and nutrition to keep you alive?
Mhm.
If you are in a state where it's unlikely for you to recover, do you want to still have everything done?
Mhm.
Or you could put in a phrase that is often used called avoiding heroic measures,
Yeah.
you know, um, having gone through uh, the DNR question.
Mhm.
So you know this, but I'll let our listeners in on this. My husband died 3 years ago, and he coded in the hospital, which means his heart stopped beating. And they did revive him with CPR that broke
Yeah.
3 ribs. It's very traumatic.
Yeah.
And at one point, we had, well, when I went to see him in the ICU, they said, do you want us to revive him if he should code again? And I said, no, make him DNR. I do not want to continue this kind of torture.
Yeah.
But letting people know that is, are you okay with, getting revived and having broken ribs? The older we get, the less likely you are going to survive a CPR revival.
Yeah. And one of the really important things to remember about your advanced directive and also your healthcare proxy, power of attorney, is that about 90% of the medical expenses you're going to rack up in your entire life come near the end of life. And so if you don't have these things in place, the hospitals have both a financial and an ethical incentive and a legal incentive to do everything they can to keep you alive because they can get sued. And that's where they make their money. And like it or not, it's in providing all this extra care at the end of life is really quite lucrative for them as well as legally necessary if they don't have these advanced directives. So you're going to get a lot of unnecessary treatment if you don't put these things in place, or potentially get unnecessary treatment and things that are going to both prolong your life, but in this case, prolong your suffering. And that can be really devastating to watch. So if you know you don't want to have all these heroic measures taken and your situation is terminal, a hospital can't, decide to kill you and let you not do everything they can in their power to keep you alive. So they will. And that can be, as I saw with my stepfather, it was a really painful, traumatic, difficult situation where they just kept treating him, and we knew he wasn't going to make it. So why do you keep having to do all this stuff to him? That's literally torturing him and making the end of life torturing him, and it was really torture for my mom as well to have to watch him go through that kind of suffering.
Yeah. And so having the advance directive also can help avoid other relatives saying, "Do everything,"
Yeah.
when your preference is, "Let me go in peace."
Mhm.
Having that in writing is very, helpful
Yeah.
in in terms of just providing the guidance, as well as just kind of not legal standings so much as just, "Look, this is what they said they wanted, so let's do that."
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And one thing people that is really important is that when you do your will, you do your power of attorney, you do your advanced directives, you got to make sure you keep them updated after like a divorce or remarriage or a named beneficiary dies. That one of the things is people forget to update these documents, so they do need to stay current. But that's going to create a lot of problems as well.
Yeah. And yeah, let's talk about beneficiary designations, kind of shifting over to the financial side. Uh, you can then avoid probate with beneficiary designations on your bank account,
Hmm.
on your IRA
Hmm.
account, your um, insurance,
Hmm.
and a number of areas where it says basically, when I die, so and so gets the account.
Hmm.
And that makes it very easy to transfer assets when you die and avoiding probate.
Yeah, exactly right. So that's super important. And I think to keep in mind is that you make sure doing the documents is one thing, but make sure that you put them in the right place is equally important, right? If you do them and no one knows where to find them, they're as good as as if they didn't exist. So one place you don't want them is in a safe deposit box because that gets sealed upon your death. So a safe box is actually the worst place to put it. Um, and generally, you want to make multiple copies. You can get multiple notarized copies, and then distribute them to the people who are your beneficiaries or whoever has your powers of attorney. They're the people who need the documents, not you, because when comes time to use them, you're not going to be able to access them. So they need to be someplace where you've told people where they are or given them to the people for whom they're relevant. And that's going to be extremely important. And also to include your digital passwords or any digital assets you have will make things a lot easier. Is there a list of how can people access all your digital stuff if you're even just temporarily or permanently, when you pass?
I know there are, password lock boxes, as it were, that you can put your passwords in and just have one master password to allow somebody to access all of them. I'm kind of old school. I use a spreadsheet.
Mhm. Yep.
And, so I'm always writing the new one on the spreadsheet, and eventually I'm going to have to update the spreadsheet because it's 5 pages long and, it needs to be updated.
Yeah.
But, yeah, so letting people know where are your passwords. Unfortunately, my husband did not take my advice, and I didn't know most of his passwords. So, there's stuff out there floating around that can't get shut down because we don't have the passwords.
Yeah. So that's going to be really important. And then all your, it also include, a list of your accounts, institutions, contacts. That would be really helpful to have in that there as well. Like who are all the important people that need to be informed and, you know, um, just keeping all that stuff.
I,
Tr-
I do. I do offer a 10-page planning form where you can pull all that kind of information together on my agoodgoodbye.com website.
Right.
Yeah.
Fabulous. So anything else on the legal side we need to cover that you can think of?
I think we've touched on most of it. Yeah, have a good lawyer who's
Yeah.
an estate lawyer. Not
So,
yeah.
but even, yeah, as you said, but some people don't, people who are struggling financially, they just feel like I can't afford a lawyer. Like this is just outside my budget. Still, it shouldn't be prohibiting you from doing these documents anyway. Like I said, it can be a do-it-yourself project. It's not optimal. It's not ideal, but it's sort of like plumbing. If the situation is simple enough, you can do it yourself. But if it's complicated, you really would do a lot of professional in there because if you get it wrong, it could be really problematic.
Yes. Yes. I think well, and also you'll want to involve your financial advisor, a CPA, and definitely at least the first year of doing taxes after somebody dies. There are certain things you need to be aware of and take into account.
So, do you want to move into the emotional side of all this for a few minutes? Is that
Yes, let's
ready for
talk
that?
about the Enneagram and
Let's talk in general terms. What do you see are the emotional blocks in general that prevent people from tackling this stuff? What do you see that gets in the way, or what are the resistances that you see?
resistance to, oh, I don't want to be seen as morbid. Why
Uh-huh.
are you dwelling on death? And it's like, it's it's a fact of life that we are all going to die. So just, approaching it as a practical matter is my approach to it.
Yeah,
Um, so people don't want to be morbid. They don't want to there's the idea that, oh, if I talk about it, it's going to happen sooner rather than later.
right, right.
Uh, and that's not true. I've been doing this for 16 years. So, yeah, so
It's
far,
that
so good.
it's that superstition around it, like
Superstition, yes.
yeah,
Yeah. But, I think there's a change in the zeitgeist. I think death positivity is it's making it easier for people to have these conversations.
yeah.
Death cafes. Like I was one of the first people to hold the death cafe in the United States, and uh, I think at least I'm seeing more about this in popular culture. Death doulas
Yeah.
are there to help people have these conversations and plan ahead.
Yeah. Exactly. And one of the things is I just want to hit again a little bit is just what an act of compassion it is to do these things for the people you leave behind. It really, you could. It's kind of selfish not to do it. It's a kind of like not taking responsibility for your life and for your finances in a way that's so important. You think, well, I'm not going to be around, so I have to deal with it. Well, yeah, but then you're leaving a huge mess behind that just is really hard to clean up. Like if you don't tackle this in advance, you're creating suffering on top of suffering. There's going to be the loss and grief from your death that's going to deeply impact the people you care about. But then to put this extra burden on them at exactly the wrong time is really a kind of, not to guilt people into this, but it's kind of cruel. And so it really is a gift that you're giving to the people you're leaving behind. So encourage people to get on top of this stuff.
I created a game called the Newly Dead game.
Uh-huh.
The the original version was for couples to test how well they know each other's last wishes.
Uh-huh.
I also did a singles edition so everybody in the audience could play.
Mhm.
And it's 4 questions, basically how well prepared you are in terms of estate planning, funeral planning, disposition, and advanced medical directives. And so there are 4 levels of preparation, and the last answer to each question is, "I don't care, I'll be dead." And you get 0 points for that answer.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, if you're familiar with the Enneagram, if you could put something in the chat, just let us know if this is so. We kind of, I'm assuming that people in the audience are not familiar with it, and we probably need to do a little primer on it. But maybe we could talk about what the Enneagram is and how it affects your emotional states and how it might affect your approach to end of life, and maybe why. What are the deeper anxieties that might be preventing you from tackling this stuff? Does that sound like a plan?
Mhm.
So, um,
I don't
any
know.
what's your type? What's Tell us what your type is, Gail.
I'm a 9. That is
Mhm,
a peacemaker.
mhm. So, what does that mean for you? If it when it comes to end of life stuff, how does that affect the way that you might approach this?
In my case, I am so the peacemaker does not like arguments, does
Mhm.
not like conflict.
Yeah,
And so I find being prepared and being open to talking about it helps head off conflict.
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in the Enneagram, there's these 9 archetypes of personality in the Enneagram, and the word Enneagram, Ennea means 9 in Greek, and gram means drawn. So there's these 9 archetypes. We tend to draw them on a circle, and you kind of think of a pie chart, and you kind of slice it into, or a color wheel is actually a better metaphor. Yeah, there you go. That's the circle, and there's sort of 9 points on that star, and it's really a deep, and I can only give you a quick intro to it here. I won't torture you with the whole gambit, but essentially it's our childhood defense mechanisms that develop in order to protect our ego from the biggest stressors in our childhood environment. And it really shapes the way that the lens through which we view reality and approach all problems. But particularly when it comes to the problem of death, there's going to be kind of a unique take that we're each going to have on it. And um, I'll sort of skip the why. There's a whole lecture on why the Enneagram works. We really have been able to ground it in uh, the latest research in neurobiology and childhood developmental psychology. But I'll save that lecture. I've got a bunch of YouTube videos you can watch if you want to go into those things. You can check out my YouTube channel. But essentially, what happens is that you have um, this core wound that we all experience. I call it your sacred wound. And it happens in childhood that allows you to separate and individuate from your caregivers. And the wound is really, uh, there's really 3 ways we can experience that wound through one of we call them the big 3 negative emotions. And those negative emotions are going to be anger, grief, and fear. So there's these three core negative emotions, and we tend to get hit with one of them more than the other in our childhood. And then there's three ways we can process that emotion. We can either internalize it, which is kind of like giving yourself an emotional wedgie. You can externalize it, which is kind of like having a food fight with the world. Or you can have both. You can have a conflicted kind of relationship to that anger, that grief, or that fear. And so that's why there's 9 types. So we'll talk about them. I'll kind of go around the circle just really quickly, and then we talk about how each of them might approach death and dying and end of life grief. And so I'm going to start with type 8. The numbers don't matter. They're just placeholders. There's no ranking, or isn't like one number is better than the other. We could give them colors as name, whatever you want. But type 8, we call them the challenger. Um, I use car metaphors sometimes. I think that's helpful because think about a car. Like your car is totally unique. You could find yours in a parking lot. It's got a unique year, make, and model, but but there's a archetypes of cars. There's sports cars. There's SUVs. There's compact cars, and your car, no matter what it is, in order to be roadworthy, and just like your ego, in order to drive on the highway of life, it fits one of these patterns. And so, but it's still completely customizable to you. So think of the chassis of your ego. And so I call it the Hummer of egos. They're sort of the tank of the Enneagram. They tend to be able to they roll over objects and confront challenges head on, but they don't tend to be very fuel efficient with their opinions. They tend to be live large, live loud, and they're they enjoy the way the 8 approaches life is that they think the best defense is a good offense. So their anger, that their sacred wound of is anger. So they experience more anger than the other 3 big, more than say grief or fear, and they externalize that anger, so push it out at the world. And they don't like being harmed or controlled. That's maybe the biggest point about an 8, is their greatest fear is being harmed or controlled. So they tend to take charge and take control in order to gain security and certainty over their environment. So think, like Winston Churchill or Reverend Martin Luther King, or was it Gordon Ramsay, or people who just they're always challenging the boundaries and of reality around them, and they tend to enjoy a good fight in some way. So if you push them, they tend to push back. Is the way you will look at an 8. But when it comes to death, and their worst fear is that they fear being harmed or controlled or annihilation, and so they don't want to be controlled. They don't want to be manipulated. They don't want to be violated. And we say they have a worse vice. And the worst vice is for the 8 is lust, this lust for intensity, this lust for life. It says that we say their superpower is having a super amount of energy or power. And so when they engage with something with death, they're more likely to go the do-it-yourself route. They might trust, the lawyers, or they may not want anyone else. They're afraid no one else is going to get it right. And so they want to control the outcome beyond the grave oftentimes, or they don't want to think about what's going to happen beyond the grave. So it's really, for them, the emotional hurdle for the 8 is overcoming their their vulnerability that mortality brings. And so there's this. It's really, for an 8, it's almost the worst fear. It's almost harder for an 8 to confront their mortality in that raw way than because they can't intimidate death, you can't out negotiate it, and you can't protect the people you love from that grief. So they need to hear that the most powerful thing they can do for the people they love is to really give those clear instructions and be able to surrender the control that comes at the end of life. And so it's really hard for them to think about an advanced directive or power of attorney for somebody else, because now somebody else has got control over me. And that's really scary for an 8. That's really one of their worst fears. So it's something they kind of need to confront head on. Does that give us enough of an overview for type 8?
Yeah, although what I'm hearing is this is a prime candidate for somebody to avoid making those arrangements.
Exactly. Right. So for 8, it can be very exactly. So now each type has healthy expressions and unhealthy expressions. So we're just kind of talking about the unhealthy expression of your type. So this is why the 8's going to avoid this process. And each of the 9 types is going to be avoiding it for different reasons. And it's just trying to name those reasons and understand it. So if we go over to the 9, we kind of go around the circle, they have both an internalized and externalized anger. And what that means is, so 8s probably had a lot of betrayal or injustice in their childhood. Type 9s basically had a lot of needs that maybe didn't get met because maybe they were, they had a sibling was high maintenance or something, or mom and dad just weren't available. So 8s, or excuse me, 9s, what their struggle is, there was some part in their childhood where they had a hard time getting their needs met themselves, and the people around them weren't meeting those needs either. And it created a lot of anger and resentment in them, but they don't ever want to face that anger. It's like a volcano sitting inside them that they never, ever, ever want to touch. They tend to deny and repress it and push it down. And they're afraid that conflict is going to, like the Incredible Hulk, if they ever tap into that anger, it's going to erupt and rip them apart. So 9s tend to go with the flow, very easygoing, very warm, very affable. Yeah, Gail, you're very warm and kind and sweet, but they have a hard time expressing their opinions because they tend to go along to get along. So for 9s, the way they tend to avoid conflict is that if I don't care about the outcome, then almost any outcome is kind of okay. So sometimes they will defer big decisions to the people around them, or merge with the needs or desires of the people in their life. So, you know, for when they avoid estate planning, it's like sort of poignant. They don't want to upset themselves, first of all, and they don't want to upset the people around them when they're avoiding this stuff. And they don't want to think about their own end of life wishes, because sometimes thinking about their own needs feels on some level selfish. And they can kind of they can circle around this stuff and just and just simply not get around to doing it. We say the worst vice for a 9 is a kind of sloth when they're unhealthy, and so they think about it, they plan to do it, and they just never get to it because it's just the conflict that it brings up for them inside them, or the conflict of sorting out who gets what, or how do I balance all the competing needs of the people who I love in my life. It just feels overwhelming, and they just gonna maybe just not get to it.
Mhm.
So just they need to hear, like you said, Gail, so poignantly, that getting your affairs in order, it's not an act of conflict. It's really a form of conflict, of avoiding conflict. So it really can reframe it for them in a way that helps them take positive action.
Yeah.
All right.
So what are ones?
Okay, ones. Oh, and I call 9s the RV of egos. They're sort of the, for keeping with the car metaphor, they just often want to camp out at the park ground and chill out while the world kind of passes by sometimes. Yeah. So type 1 is, we call them often called the perfectionist, or the improver. And so what happened with the 1 is they have this anger that they've internalized towards themselves, and it creates their greatest fear or of being bad or defective. They got, as children, they kind of got this message over and over again of be a good boy, be a good girl, do it right. Maybe they were the eldest child in a family and they had to take a lot of responsibility at a young age. And so they feel this need to um, be, or maybe they were in a situation where there were really overly strong moral and religious sort of boundaries put on them about what's right and what's wrong. So living by a really strict code is often indicative of a type 1. But they're always trying to perfect themselves, and they can see the flaws themselves very quickly. And so they don't want to trigger that anger at themselves for doing it wrong. So they're always trying to do it right, do it the right way, get it perfect. And they can often see the flaws in the people around them and in the things around them very easily. So they make great accountants and CFOs. But I had a friend of mine who was a type 1, and we walked into a very fancy restaurant, and the first thing he noticed was that on the far wall there was a painting that was a little crooked. He had to call the waitress over and be like, "Hey, could you fix that painting over there?" Because it was bugging him so much, right? So
Wow.
they really want to do it the right way. But this plays out in estate planning with sort of maddening precision. If they're avoiding this stuff, it's like they're preparing to prepare. They're researching every estate attorney's the way some people might research an oncologist, right? They're reading the fine print on every advance directive. They're waiting till they find the perfect time, the perfect professional, the perfect way to express what they think should happen when they die. And then the problem is that perfect time never arrives. So they let perfection be the enemy of good enough. And the problem with the one is that death is the ultimate imperfection, right? You can't edit it, you can't correct it, you can't file an amendment once you're done, right? So and they can't file your healthcare proxy to cover every possible scenario. So they just need to hear that good enough estate planning is better than perfect estate plan that never arrives.
I have a friend who I think is a one,
Yeah.
and he's very much prepared. Actually, he doesn't have kids, so he has a nephew that he has put in charge of all of his plans,
Yeah.
and he does these letters to his nephew, updating any changes or whatnot. So that sounds like a one who is actually on top of it.
Yeah, that's great. I see
Yep.
Emmy put in the chat that her husband was an 8 who denied he would die, right? That's exactly right. They're just not in denial about it because it's just too hard to face that and that ultimate reality for them. Yeah, and just left a mess to deal with. So, oh, I'm so sorry. I mean, with no space to time or grieve, you're just in the soup in the mix. All right. So moving around, we're going to go to type 2. Um, in type 1, I call them the BMW of egos. And the reason is because they're sort of precision engineered, but they do take a fair bit of maintenance, right? And then if we jump around, we look at the type 2, we call them the helper. I call them the ambulance of egos. Now they're in the grief or the shame triad, so their deepest when they go to a dark emotional space, it tends to be around sort of grief or shame that they then externalize. So they feel grief about how they think people perceive them, which is a kind of shame, is another way of looking at it. But then they feel that creates their greatest fear that they're fundamentally unlovable. So they tend to run around like an ambulance, helping people almost compulsively. They feel this need to I'm gonna tell you how wonderful you are, and I'm gonna be very helpful to you, but it's kind of a pay to play game that they're because they want that to be liked, and they want that affection to be returned back at them. So the best way to get someone to compliment you is to compliment them first. Or the best way to get someone to help you is to help them first. So they're really looking for those compliments and they're looking for that help. And the problem is that they're so focused on taking care of everybody else, they don't ever take care of themselves. So they're so busy rescuing or helping the world, they think that taking care of my needs feels selfish, or thinking about what I need at the end of life is really, is really challenging for them because their greatest fear is being unwanted or loved, and they kind of take a you know pride in believing no one can care for the people they love as well as they can, and so they just think they're going to avoid the end of life planning because it's just too heartbreaking to look at it. It means admitting that they have needs, that their absence is going to leave a hole, and that they matter, as a person, not just as a function. And so their identity is built on being indispensable, and that confrontation with their own finitude and mortality is just really terrifying for them. And there's really a second trap here for the two. They sometimes refuse to formalize their wishes because doing so would mean that acknowledging that the people they love is going to have to manage without them. And that goes beyond death. And so leaving those clear instructions really helps. It's that real gift that you want to give to the people you leave behind, that this is really an act of generosity and an act of service, so that they don't have they can spare their loved ones the wreckage of an unprepared estate.
It sounds to me like it too might be more inclined to doing the planning,
They m
the end of
well, they
life.
might be, yeah, but so we're really just talking about when they're avoiding it. So if you're doing the planning, great, like, you're already on top of it, but it's
Yeah.
like, w for those 2s that are avoidant around this stuff, like, what is that emotional driver that might be tripping you up, right?
Mhm,
Right,
mhm. Good.
yeah, and then we'll get to the type 3, which is my type, woohoo, right? We often call them the achiever or the race car because they're always racing for goals and trying to accomplish stuff, but leaving their authentic selves in the dust a bit, right? The the three, excuse me, has this problem of both an internalized grief about how they perceive themselves, which is kind of a shame, and they have an externalized grief about how they think people perceive them. So they feel they're kind of stuck in this stereophonic shame all the time that makes creates their greatest fear of being worthless or not having any real value. And so what that does for a three is it makes us run around trying to achieve big things in life, to get the gold star for the teacher, get the pat in the head, get the promotion, have, you know, be successful is essentially the message that a three hears from a very early age. Is your performance is what matters, not who you are intrinsically or authentically. So they're always performing for the world around them, trying to get people to value. Well, the two is trying to get people to love them and like them. The three is trying to get people to value them and see that they're really worthy because of all the accomplishments that they make. But they tend to be mask changing all the time. They're putting on whatever mask the, the the people around them want them to wear, need them to wear, in order to get that approval. And so for three, death is sort of not an inconvenience. It's sort of the ultimate professional failure. It's the project that they can't optimize. It's the meeting they can't reschedule. It's the deal that can't close in their favor, no matter how charming or capable they happen to be. And so they avoid estate planning because it really forces that confrontation with the outcome. They can't spin it. They can't negotiate it. They can't work around it. And of course, threes are always extraordinarily busy and their calendar is always full and their goals are always on track. And death is just not on the roadmap right now. And so it just doesn't align with their current objectives. When they avoid it, if they aren't taking this into account, it's really that thing that they're trying to avoid, that ultimate confrontation with that loss of identity. That's really painful for them to acknowledge. And so for them, Will really has to understand it's not just about what you leave behind. Um, it's a conversation like an audit that wherever their life is, it just doesn't really add up to enough. Like because they equate their net worth with their self worth. So oftentimes, if they don't feel like their estate is big enough, or it's not impressive enough, or whatever enough, then just sitting with looking at the sum total of their accomplishments may not feel like they actually have done enough. So they don't want to like get then having this accounting at the end of life that might come any day feels just unbearable for them. So it's their emotional hurdle for them, is accepting that the legacy is not just their portfolio balance or their LinkedIn headline, that the people they love, really, they're not looking for a performance review here at the end. They just need a healthcare proxy and a good beneficiary update to save the people the pain of all this mess.
So, have you done your estate planning?
Absolutely. I've got it sitting in my file cabinet. I've got notarized copies to my loved ones. Definitely got that one under control, 100%.
Good, good.
Yeah. All right. Um, so then looking at type 4, they're often called the individualist. So type 4s are unique in every way, and they make that uniqueness sort of their defining property. Now, they have this internalized grief about how they perceive themselves. And what that means is they feel like they're always the outsider. They're always the misfit. They're always the red sock in a drawer of black socks. Like they just, uh, and so it almost defines them in a way. And so the worst vice for a four, we say, is envy. They sort of envy the uniqueness they see in everyone and everything else around them that they sometimes can't see in themselves. So they try to make their uniqueness that they try to stand out and stand apart by just doing it different. Whatever conventionality says I should be doing, they tend to rebel against it and tend to want to go their own way. And that can get them all kinds of trouble with estate planning, because it really is kind of a pretty cookie cutter process and a little bit mundane and pedestrian in many ways. And so they think that they're different. Like, maybe I'm not going to die, everybody else dies, right? Uh, and now, or fours often love sort of the melancholy, the bittersweet aspects of life. And they may have written 1,000 poems about death, but the actual when they're avoidant around it, it's like they just think that um, they just think that sitting down with the state attorney and filing out the standard form is just feels sort of almost deeply personal and deeply offensive in some way. So they how can a boilerplate directive really possibly capture the complexity of who I am? And how can a checkbox of their wishes, convey their extraordinary life accomplishments or things or measures? So they want their end of life planning to be as singular and unique as they are. And the legal system is just not that interested in their aesthetic preferences. And so they kind of may opt out entirely from the process. And that really gets them into trouble. So, um, and of course, they often long for the beauty of what's unfinished or what's just out of reach. And planning for their death just makes it too concrete. It makes it scheduled in a way, and it removes the ambiguity about that they sort of thrive and live in. So they just really need to hear that nothing is more profoundly personal than deciding who's going to make these decisions for you, for your body, for your state, when you can't speak for yourself. And it's not a bureaucratic act. This really can be an act of your identity so that you end your life on your terms, not on somebody else's.
I love that, because I know of, very unique people who are like, "Well, I don't fit in a box."
Yes.
So, but those rules that apply to estate planning, I think there are ways that creative people could creatively pass along their assets and
Yeah.
make that work for them.
Yeah. Make
What
your
what what kind of vehicle is the for?
Oh, I call them a custom car because they would paint their car purple and drive it backwards just to stand out, right? Right. So you can be creative. You can make this whole process an act of your identity and lean into that for the fours. All right. So now we're getting a lot. Now we're through the first two triads. We're through the anger triad. We're through the grief triad. We got three more to wrap up here, and we're now into the fear triad. And so the first number in the fear triad is type 5. We often call them the investigator or the observer, and these tend to be the real brainiacs of the Enneagram. They have a fear that they've internalized, meaning they feel like their greatest fear for a 5 is being helpless or incompetent. And they find life often very in childhood. They often had childhood environments are very intrusive or intrusive, where their boundaries weren't very well respected for some whatever reason. So they tend to retreat into their minds, and they find that um, I call them the compact car, not because they're small personalities by any means, but because they have a small gas tank for social interaction. But they often fit into really tight mental spaces where the rest of us are afraid to go. So, like, think Albert Einstein, think Stephen Hawking, or Mark Zuckerberg. They tend to be a little socially awkward at times, right? Don't and they tend to be very reserved and hold things in, but they love the world of ideas. They love the world of their imagination. Um, but their wound is really about being invaded or overwhelmed, or they feel constantly depleted by a world that demands of them more than they feel like they can give. And when they do act, they will always want to do it like with great competency and great proficiency. And so um, they tend to hoard their emotions. They tend to hoard their time, their money, their resources, but they'll end up like researching estate planning, kind of like with the thoroughness of an academic preparing for a dissertation. It becomes this huge research project in their minds, and they never actually get to the point where they take action. They might learn about revocable trust. They know the difference between the different powers of attorney, but they bookmark 17 articles, and they have a folder for it, but what they just haven't done is make the appointment with the lawyer or actually sat down to do it. Because engaging with this stuff, first of all, fives hate, they have, well, hate, but they have a hard time letting their emotional world out. And discussing their finances with a stranger can feel really invasive. And involving their family members in these conversations is also kind of vulnerability that they have a hard time dealing with. And it means surrendering the one thing holds most sacred, which is their control over their inner world and control over their resources. So surrendering this stuff to someone through power of attorney and through their will planning, it brings up their deepest fear in a very visceral way because death is the ultimate form of incompetence. You can't understand your way out of it. You can't, no amount of preparation or knowledge can put you back in control over it. So they can that existential anxiety can become very generally destabilizing. So they just need a clear boundary process, get one attorney, a defined agenda, limited emotional ambiguity, and know that they can do it. And they need it to feel manageable, not infinite. It feels like an infinite process for them. And they get stuck and never, when they are avoidant. Now, all fives are not avoidant around this stuff, but when they are, that's probably where they're getting stuck.
I had a boyfriend who I think was a 5. He was very mentally busy, and, he actually was very well prepared when, he died. He actually had COPD and was on hospice for a couple of months. He wanted to be in his home. He wanted to be independent.
Yeah.
And I was his hospice contact. And he had done a really great letter to his sister about carrying out his wishes.
Mhm.
And he didn't own his house. He gave up his car. So really it was his guitars that needed to be passed along. And but he did a really good job of in that letter. And I use that as an example of this is a really good thing
Yeah.
to do. Yeah.
That's great. Wow. Nobody took care of that. Um, okay, we got two more to wrap up here. And if anyone has questions on these types or yours, please jump. We're following your comments in the chat. So, moving over to type 6, they're often called the loyalist or the observer. Now, I call them the family sedan of egos because they want every safety feature imaginable in a couple that they invented themselves. So, type sixes have both an internalized fear, like the 5 of being incapable or not incompetent, but they also have an externalized fear that the outside world isn't really trustworthy either. So they don't really trust themselves. They have a hard time trusting their own decision making processes, but they also have a hard time trusting other people at the same time. And that creates this sort of paralysis for them. We say that the greatest fear for a type 6 is being without support or guidance. So they they're suspicious of external authority, but they also want it at the same time. So when they find an authority they trust, or they find friends that they trust, they're very loyal to those support systems because that's really what they're looking for is this external network or community or support, so they might love to be in the military or the clergy or kind of maybe a middle management position, but they feel like there's this real boundaries around them that keep life in check and the chaos of life in check because they're always they're the sort of the worst case scenario thinkers of the Enneagram. They're always preparing for what could go wrong. So in a weird way, they're probably more likely to be prepared for their death than any of the 9 types because they've already worried about this happening. So they're likely to actually take this stuff on. But when they're avoidant around it, that anxiety, that constant threat detection system for a 6 is on hyper alert all the time. So it's almost like there's there's like this committee of voices in their head always giving them different ideas about which way to go and which way to do. And what that does is it just sort of paralyzes them when they're avoiding this stuff. Now, not all 6 will, and this is just at their unhealthy levels. But so often catastrophizing what will happen when they die. But they know about it, but they know they should put these documents in place, but they just don't exist. So every time they try to move forward, sort of new problems seem to appear. What if they pick the wrong executor? What if the attorney makes a mistake? What if their siblings contest the will? What if they change their minds about their healthcare proxy? So what if? And so they're not avoiding it out of denial because they've certainly thought about their death a lot. It's just they're searching for the perfectly safe decision that leads to no decision.
Mhm.
And so they have to maybe realize that after they're gone, they're not going to be there to make sure things go right. And they have to trust. And trust for a 6, it just doesn't come naturally, and it really needs to be practiced. So learning to trust that this is going to be okay, but only if to the extent that death is okay, but only if they can get some of these documents in place before they die and not procrastinate on it and wait.
Yeah, from what you've been saying, it seems like, yeah, maybe a fear-based person like that, might be more inclined to actually get the paperwork done.
Yeah, I mean, because sixes plan for the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
It's highly improbable that sixes are going to have a hard time with this one. But if they do, that's probably why they're having trouble.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which
All
brings
right.
us around to
We're
sevens.
on to seven, type seven. Okay, sevens are called the enthusiast. I call them the SUV of egos because they're kind of ready for any off-road adventure as long as it doesn't involve being in pain in the present moment. So for type sevens, they have this externalized fear that the world isn't going to meet their needs. They may have had inconsistent parenting or, just their needs weren't consistently met. They felt like the external world isn't going to provide what they need to be safe. So they decide to go out and get it themselves, and they're always looking for more. We say the worst vice for a seven is gluttony. They want like more experiences, more opportunities, more adventures. Like, what's the next restaurant? What's the next vacation I can plan? They're very to be very. I call them enthusiasts because they're always looking to the future for, oh boy, what's next? What's next? What's next? And the reason is because their greatest fear is being trapped in pain or privation in the present moment. So that means the present moment is where they don't want to live because that's where their pain sits. So they're always future casting. They're always looking for they have tremendous amounts of FOMO or fear of missing out. Like, what's the next adventure I can plan for? And that keeps me out of the pain I'm facing right here in the present moment. And Darren, yes, sevens are the best in our cut chats. Sevens are a lot of fun. They're great. They make great friends, and they're wonderful to have around. But but the problem with the seven is death is just not a topic that they're interested in. Death is by definition the end of options, which is what sevens want more than anything. They want to keep their options open, and it really closes that door, and the adventure kind of goes off the itinerary. It's permanent adventures off the itinerary at that point. So it's not that when they avoid estate planning, it's not so much through resentment or anxiety. It's just it's through like they avoid it through relentless forward momentum. There's a trip to be planned. There's a project that's generally exciting and interesting right now. There's a conversation happening at a party that they just want to find far more interesting than anything like probate. So it's not really denial. They're just they just it's too painful. Essentially, we say sevens are often like Peter Pan. Like, they want to be the eternal child that just doesn't want to grow up. They want everything to be this wonderful, dreamlike adventure. So, and the problem is the emotional hurdle that estate planning requires. It really makes them sit in discomfort and finality. So they're always spent this whole lifetime like trying to reframe every pain into an adventure. Like the masters at spinning the negative into the positive, and it's really hard to spin death into something positive because you can't really reframe it. It just ends. So the seven who's never learned to sit with that pain finds that stillness really quite unbearable. And their avoidance masquerades as a kind of optimism, like, I don't have to I'll get to that someday. They always think there's going to be more time later. There's more possibility, more runway, of course, until there just isn't. And then it's at that point, it's really just too late. So they need to get there in again, in order as an act of love to those people that leave behind,
Yeah.
and then get back to sit down, do it, and then you can go back to enjoying the adventures of life.
Darren did a comment. There's so many other more awesome
Mm-hmm.
things to do than plan for death. But I got to tell you, if you're planning for an awesome disposition,
Mm-hmm.
if you want to have an open air cremation, you need to plan for something like that.
Or plan the
Or
party. Plan the
yeah,
party. Like, what party
and
do you want at your
yep.
death? How do you want to really be remembered? What does that farewell send off look like?
I just finished, well, completed another leg of my brother-in-law who died a year ago, was an artist who did a series about Route 66. So I have been taking his cremated remains on road trips and scattering him along the mother road. And it's been a great experience for me, as well as, he said this is what he wanted in his will.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of a fun thing to plan for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're getting to the top of the hour. We're happy to
Yeah.
stick around and answer questions and keep going. If anyone has any comments, anything, questions we can answer for you. If you do need help with any of this stuff, please reach out. We're happy to direct you in the right. I am happy to connect you with attorneys or estate planners. And also, if you want to figure out what you should be doing with your investments so that you can put those in the right, get those financial affairs in order, do some financial planning could be really helpful and as an addendum to estate planning that need sometimes can be really essential. That some people don't get to this stuff because they think their finances are in such a mess. Like, how do I get this stuff organized? I'd be happy to sit down and have those conversations with you about doing some good financial planning or getting all your investments lined up so that they're squared away for this end of life stuff.
And if you want a mortality movie night in your town, let's talk. And I'll see if I can connect with some local funeral directors that might want to hold some events
Mhm.
at their locations. Something to go to a funeral home for besides the funeral.
Amen.
Yeah. But this has been great, Doug. Great work on, I can tell you really did put a lot of thought into how each of those Enneagram types fit in with end of life planning. And this was a great conversation. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
Yep. And if you want more about your Enneagram types, check out my book, Taming Your Money Monster, available on Amazon or booksellers anywhere. And if you want to reach out to me, please shoot me a line. You can find me on my website at my name, DougLynam.com, or my email is doug@douglynam.com. Please drop me a line.
And you can reach me, Gail at agoodgoodbye.com. And I have all sorts of resources available for free at agoodgoodbye.com.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks. Take care.
Be well. Okay. Now we have to figure out we figure out how to start.
Oh, yeah.
Who
How do we
started?
stop
We haven't figured. There we go. I found the button. Thanks, guys. Be well.
it?